Hello and welcome to Dancer Support Mission by Sabine for Shine Your Light. Today we have a new episode of Dancer to Dancer, Words of Wisdom. And the goal of those interviews is to meet the person behind the dancer and share with you all not only the highlights of someone's career, but also the challenges behind the scenes. Truly, my wish is to bring healing to the dance world, dancing to heal and healing to dance, one artist at a time, and one personal story at a time. And today I'm delighted to welcome Zippora Karz. Zippora, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So Zippora, you've been a soloist with the New York City Ballet. You're a repetiteur for Balanchine's work all over the world. And you have a very fascinating story also outside of this that I want to talk about, but I'm going to let you talk about all this. But we're going to start with the beginning. Could you tell us how you started dancing and why, and when you started to want to do it professionally?
Well, dancing is in my family lineage. My grandmother was in vaudeville. She was actually a child star on Broadway. When she was 15, 16 years old, she had a solo act. And when she had her children, she did a little dance act with my mother and my aunt. And my mother actually went to Juilliard. And she always felt she lacked the competitive edge to make it because she never had formal training. My grandmother just put the girls in act and dance, but they never had actual lessons. So my mother always said, if her children actually showed a desire to be dancers, she would make sure they had formal training. So she made sure that my sisters and I had ballet training. And it just happened that there was an amazing teacher who was 15 minutes from where we lived. She's still with us. Her name is Sheila Roseanne. She's still teaching in her 90s. And Sheila's dream was always to dance for the great George Balanchine. And so she had flat feet and she couldn't get up on point. And so she was never going to be a ballerina. She actually was accepted into the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo as a character dancer. But for Sheila, it had to be ballet. She just knew she wanted to teach ballet. And so she started teaching. And she would go every year. Actually, Balanchine saw the improvement in the students when they would come to Los Angeles and do a Midsummer Night's Dream. So he personally went to her school and watched her teach and gave her a big lesson on how to hold the hands and the head and the neck, and then invited her to come to New York every year. And that's where she developed a relationship with him and all the teachers at the School of American Ballet. She's particularly loved Suki Shore and Stanley Williams, and would come home to my studio, and we didn't know what we were learning, but she was just a woman with a mission. And all I knew is that as I trained in this particular way of moving, something happened to my body and something happened to me with the music. I had experiences in the ballet studio at a very young age of feeling transported and feeling that I no longer was me. And I had feelings of something bigger than who I was. And I always say, the only way I could say it is it felt like love. I felt at a very early age a universal feeling of love, and something that I liked about myself. Home was not great. My parents were divorced, and my mother's new boyfriend was physically abusive to me. And I never wanted to be home. And so I just spent all my hours. I would actually take the bus from school right to the ballet studio because I didn't want to go home because he was there and my mother was working. So I go.
How old were you then?
I was about 12, 13, 14, those years. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to be in the ballet studio. And I didn't know you could be a professional dancer. I didn't know that there was anything beyond that. It was just, that was where I wanted to be in my life. I wanted to be, a veterinarian, or I had an obsession with, teaching Braille for the, I learned sign language, and I wanted to teach I always knew I wanted to teach in some capacity, but for the blind and deaf, or I had aspirations of being the first woman president, because I was so angry about the way we were treating the planet and the life on it, and, people, but also animals. And, so my brain was someplace else, but I just loved the way it felt to move to the music in this particular way. So my story goes that Sheila had different knowledge than I did about what it was possible. Mm-hmm. And she made sure that I auditioned for the School of American Ballet. Balanchine was still alive at the time. And she really felt completely determined that I belonged in New York with George Balanchine. And I even fought it a little bit. I'd gone to a summer intensive at San Francisco. Lou Christensen was still the director there, and I really liked it. And I had gone to New York for one summer. The company wasn't there in the summers; they were up in Saratoga, and it was just way too intimidating for me. I was not the kind of dancer that was very athletic. I was much more of a musical, heartfelt dancer, and I always had a nice line. I had a physical look, and I was heartfelt. But I really struggled. I always say I was more colt than thoroughbred, and I just felt that I just wasn't made out for New York. It was too competitive for me, and I really wanted to go back to San Francisco, where I felt they really liked me, and it was a little more comfortable for me. And Sheila was not having any of it. She had a conference with my mom and I, and she just said, "I know this more than anything I've ever known in my life. Zippora belongs in New York. She needs to go back to New York." And when I went back for that summer, that was a summer I turned 15. And I think all the work that I had done in the studio, Sheila had a policy where you could take as many classes as you wanted below your level. And I was in the highest level now. And since I took the bus directly to ballet, I would do my homework really quickly. And then I would take 3 and 4 classes. I soaked it all up. And so without knowing it, I grew 5 inches that year. And I just got much stronger. So when I went to New York that summer, that was the second summer, I was a different dancer, and they really took notice. And so when I was 15, they asked me if I would stay on as a winter student. And honestly, I actually said, I'm only 15. I actually said that to Madame Glevoff at the time. I said, well, I'm really only 15, and my parents would not be okay with that. I was speaking for them. I hadn't told my mom. So I went home, and I didn't tell my mom because we didn't have money for anything like that, and I didn't want to stress her out. But I wanted Sheila to be proud of me. So I hung back as everybody was doing their curtsy to the teacher at the end of class. And so she says, "Oh, how was the summer this year?" And I said, "Well, I think they liked me this summer." And she says, "Oh, really? Why?" And I said, I'm going to tear up. I said, well, they asked me to stay on as a winter student. And, Sheila, she basically didn't say anything. She just grabbed me by the hand and pulled me running to my mother out the door, in the parking lot, just screaming, you're going. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, what have I done? What have I done? So that's what started it, really, is by that point, I really hadn't seen any ballet. I didn't know anything besides my experience in the studio. And so long story short, with that one, within a month, it all came together, and I was on an airplane back to New York. And I hadn't seen a live ballet to this point, so I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And then you go for the winter, and Balanchine is there, and the New York City Ballet is there. And so, the first thing that happened to me was I started to see the performances and the ballets, and Suzanne Farrell was dancing, and Patricia McBride was dancing. And I think I just missed Allegra Kent. She just retired. And Kay Mazzo had just retired, but I saw plenty of videos of them, and I became friends with somebody who had a lot of videotapes, and I just, of course, not to mention Gelsey Kirkland, who was over it, with Baryshnikov over it at ABT, and Natalia Makarova, and just this whole world that I stepped into, besides all of the great teachers from Danilova, and I think Dabrowska had just passed away, but Muriel Stewart was still teaching, and Dudin and Tumkowski. And I just stepped into this world, and I remember just feeling like, who didn't tell me? How could I not know? How could I not know that something like this existed in the universe? I felt touched by greatness and by love and by magic. And I wasn't thinking beyond just being there and getting to experience it.
Wow. So,
Yeah.
so you finished your schooling there, and then you joined the New York
Well,
City?
what happened was, so I was 15 at the time, and we would have a year-end workshop performance, and so Balanchine would come to those, and he would work with us and rehearse with us, and I did one of the leads for one of them. Actually, from the beginning, they were giving me some leading roles, and so Balanchine was working with me, and it became my dream. It wasn't my dream before that, but all of a sudden life just went boom. I want to dance for this man. I always knew it was a little dysfunctional with the way that, no, he didn't really want you to have anything beyond that in your life. I mean, it was known that he didn't really want people to have families, and he want you to be solely devoted. And having come from this wasn't going to be my life, I always felt that, like I said, it was a little over the top dysfunctional, but I thought, I'm going to go with it because this is just beyond, this is so magical that I am going to throw myself into this world. And Balanchine chose me for the company. And then he died. And so, before I got to get in the company and be with him, there was a year where they didn't take anybody, and there were 3 of us that had been chosen for the company by Balanchine, and we were told that they didn't know who the taste of the new director, and it was up to us if we were going to stay or not. So 2 of us stayed. One person, she left, and I got into the company with Peter Martins and Jerome Robbins as co-directors. And I knew Peter liked me. He actually, Heather Watts was from Sheila's school. Heather Watts was a principal in the New York City Ballet, and she was the girl from Peter Martins. And so Peter Martins had come to teach us when I was like 12 years old. And then when I came to New York, he let me learn the lead. He was choreographing for one of the workshop performances, and I was understudying the lead. So I knew that if he became the new director, that he liked me. So I had confidence of staying. I was absolutely going to stay. So when I got into the New York City Ballet, it really was Balanchine's company. And they were just, he was so alive and so present, not only in the ballet, but all of his dancers. And they really made an effort to make sure that those of us new young dancers felt their eyes on us. Mm-hmm. And I felt their presence, and I just I was in awe of all of them. And yet it was a very difficult time to walk into the New York City Ballet. A lot of people didn't know if Peter liked them. So I knew he liked me, and we were chosen by him. Mm-hmm. But you had an entire company that didn't know, what was going to happen and what their future was going to be like. And it was very tense, and it was a very uncomfortable position to be in, when I just wanted them to know how much I loved them and wanted to be one of them, and yet not knowing what it was going to be like for anybody in the company. So it was very difficult.
How long did it take actually to stabilize and,
Well, that's a whole other subject. But, I didn't fully go into it. I wrote a book, a memoir, once I was later diagnosed with diabetes. My 3rd year in the company, what happened to me was, my 2nd year in the company, Balanchine always singled out young up and comings that he wanted to highlight. And he was just known for plucking people out of the corps, giving them a leading role. And that was the era of unlimited possibilities that existed within the New York City Ballet. Was you didn't have to be a soloist or a principal to mm-hmm. dance the principal role. So at any moment you could be seen. I mean, even if you're in the back corner, it was the giving, the uninhibitedness, the amount of energy that you gave, no matter where you were on that stage, you could be seen, and you were seen. And so Peter gave me the Sugar Plum Fairy, Peter Martins, my 2nd year in the company. And I didn't see that one coming. I basically was told by the ballet mistress to watch the pas de deux, and I was like, what is she talking about? So I didn't know. I just walked over, and I think it was Suzanne Farrell performing it that night. I was in the Waltz of the Flowers, and I was a snowflake, and I just looked, and I'm like, did she mean that pas de deux? And so then my name went up with Peter Bowl, who's now the director of Pacific Northwest Ballet. Great human being, dancer, director. So my name went up with him to rehearse it the next day. So I was like, oh my gosh, she meant the pas de deux, the grand pas de deux. And Peter Martins was at our rehearsal, and Suzanne Farrell was in the wings, and so that was amazing. And then our name went up for casting in 1 week. So we had 1 week to prepare and get ready for it. And it was a huge deal. We all knew it. We all knew the Grand Pas because we had done it on lecture demonstrations. There was an education department at the School of American Ballet, and Suki Shore, who was our great teacher, Suki Shore, master Balanchine teacher, had let many of us do that pas de deux. And so I knew it. And I had danced it many times. So it wasn't a matter of learning it, but it was all of a sudden with the New York City Ballet. And it was a huge success. I mean, it was a great success. And yet they told me after the performance, the ballet mistress told me after the performance, we know this has been a really big deal for you. And it might be some time before we give you another leading role. You need to work on strength. And so I was like, oh, as long as I know that I'm going to get leading roles in the future, I can deal with it. And I knew I needed to get stronger. As I said, I was very heartfelt and I could do steps. It's just, I was not a very athletic dancer. I was not your sure thing athleticism. My heart and my enthusiasm took me a long way with steps working. And so I was like, I was okay with it, but my mantra became, you got to get strong. You got to get strong. You got to get strong. And so I was on the Pilates mat at, 7 a.m. before company class, and doing the gyrotonics and doing the swimming, not taking an hour off to, just, 3 ballets a night. And, our seasons were 3 months at a time. Right. And I was going 12 hours a day. And I've never been a good sleeper. I would say my personal anxiety in my life has always come out in my nervousness. I can't wind down. So I get home at night from working hard, and I was just so tired. I just wanted to go to sleep. And bing, my brain is buzzing, and I'm thinking about the music and the ballets, and what do I have to dance tomorrow, and what did this person say to me, and what am I upset about, and I just couldn't sleep at night. And so I was going on about probably 2 and 3 hours sleep a night for months. And then what happened was I started getting injured. I started, I twisted an ankle or something happened, and I was out for a period of time. And then Peter Martins was choreographing a new ballet, and it was called Les Petites Riens, and that was the Little Nothings. And it was on 8 up and coming young dancers in the company. And Wendy Whalen was one of them, and Margaret Tracy was one of them. And me and Peter Bowl were partners in it. And Jeff Edwards, who now teaches at the Juilliard School, and Kelly Cass at the time, so Peter Bowl's wife. So it was just a group of us that were all in the Corps de Ballet, and we were all being featured. And it was during that piece that I was feeling, Margaret and Wendy were younger than me, and they got in after me, and I was feeling all this pressure, like I had done so well with Sugar Plum, but there were stronger dancers coming up. And Jerry Robbins had been giving me a lot of leading roles, and all of a sudden he stopped giving me leading roles because there were younger dancers that were stronger than me. And I was feeling all of this pressure, and I just couldn't sleep. And I was feeling like I was just falling behind, and I wasn't what I could be and should be. So I just had all this pressure, and then I wasn't feeling well. I was tired. And I started to think I thought it was the end of a winter season. So it was at the end of a 3-month-long winter season. I was feeling very burnt out, and I was thinking, I just have to get through these performances. So we had the performances of Les Petites Riens. It went like 6 times. And as we do as dancers, it was just not good enough for me. I mean, I watch tapes now and I'm like, what was my problem? It was fine. But then I just thought it was awful. I was so mad at myself, and I'm looking at everybody else thinking they're so much better, and what's wrong with me? What's wrong? And I actually remember Peter Martin saying to our ballet mistress, Susie Hendel, saying, you know, what's wrong with her? Because, and I'd hear him because I'd for no reason just fall off point. You know, I'd be doing a promenade and my foot would give out, and I'm just thinking, what is wrong with me? And I was so mad at myself. And what happened was I developed, I have very sloped shoulders, and we oftentimes have to put costumes on, you know, that are made on for other bodies, because you're dancing 3 ballets a night. I mean, Le Petit Rien was one of like 40 ballets that I had. You know, and so some of the costumes
was a little nothing.
That's right. Right. So some of the costumes were rubbing and scraping under my armpits because my shoulders are very sloped. Mm-hmm. And I developed kind of a rash from that, and it developed into an infection. And I had like these boils underneath my arms, and it got to the point I couldn't lift my arms, and I'm like having to go out there and perform and be this beautiful ballerina, and I've got these awful sores under my arms. And so at first I went to a dermatologist, and he gave me a bunch of antibiotics. And then like a week later, like both arms had like all these sores, and they got worse. And I couldn't lift my arms. And I remember calling him at home, crying, just saying, I've got these premieres coming up. You've got to do something. And he's like, look, lady, you know, he's like, I'm a dermatologist. You know, if you need more answers and want more answers, you're going to have to go to an endocrinologist. You're going to have to go to an internist. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't have time for this. So on our day off, which was usually spent, you know, doing my yoga, my gyro, and my Pilates and everything I needed to do in my laundry, I went and I got blood work. And so it's still the end of the season, the end of the winter season. And I start getting messages. This is before there were cell phones. This is the 1980s, no cell phones. So just the backstage notes that we would get from the guard. And I have all these notes: Zippora, call your doctor, Zippora, call your doctor. And it's, you know, I'm leaving the theater at 11:30 at night, and I'm coming in at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's just no time to go make a call. And like I said, we didn't have cell phones in those days. And sometimes I didn't even have an hour off, you know, I didn't have a 5. So I just never called. And after 2 weeks of urgent messages, I like call her before one of the shows, and she says, you have to come see me right away. You have diabetes. And I'm thinking, what's she talking about? This is ridiculous. So I hung up the phone. She's like, you have to come. So I went and I lied to the ballet mistress. I said I wasn't feeling well. I've hopped a cab to her office. I had a performance that night, so I missed my last rehearsal. And I go and I sit in her office, and she basically just, you know, throws pamphlets on my lap about what's going to happen to me. I'm, you know, from heart disease to going blind to losing a limb to kidney failure. And she said, and I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And she gives me this whole lecture of like, you know, she's like, well, we don't want you to go overboard, and, you know, it's okay to have a piece of cake. Just don't eat the whole cake. And I'm like, oh my God, what is she talking about? Like, I'm not eating cake anyhow. Like, who does she think she's talking to? And I was so put off that she said, schedule another appointment and we'll talk more about what to do about it. And I left the office, and I just said, you know what? I'm not going back to this woman. She doesn't know who I am. I mean, I'm a disciplined dancer. Just tell me what I have to do and I'll deal with it. Mm. And I just thought, you know what? I'm burnt out.
And inform you. I mean, you know, that's what you need.
Yeah. And I just thought, you know what? I'm just burnt out. I just need some time off. This is all going to go away. It's probably a lab error. I said, you know, stuff like that doesn't happen. I was 21 years old at the time. This doesn't happen to people like me. You know, I'm an athlete. I'm just tired. So basically, I just thought it would go away. And other long story short, yeah, that didn't happen. But I was misdiagnosed. And that's all part of what I write about in my book, is that back in the 80s, it was very unlikely for a thin person in their 20s to come down with type 1 diabetes, which is the type that needs insulin. Usually that's when you're very young. Usually older people, adults, had type 2 diabetes, which is the type that can be regulated with just medication, and was most commonly associated with a lack of exercise and overweight. So they told me I had type 2 diabetes. I went to a different doctor. Long story short, I ended up having to go to another doctor. I came home to California. I needed time away from the company. Once the season ended, I thought, you know what? I have to get away. I have to go home. I went home. I went to another doctor. He told me I had type 2 diabetes. He put me on medication. And I just thought, I really don't know how to lose weight. I was so thin. I don't know how to exercise more. I'm dancing 12 hours a day. I said, but I do know I can manage my stress better, and I do know I can eat better. I mean, I was a very health conscious human being who was like, probably like a lot of us, drinking coffee all day and, craving a lot of carbs because I just needed a quick carb fix. So I wasn't doing my usual. Also in those days, I don't think I really understood what really healthy eating is. This is before there was ever a no carb, low carb diet, or now we have paleo, we have keto, we have all these ways of eating that didn't exist.
Yeah. And anyway, it's so individual, dieting and what you
Totally. And in fact, in those days, they put diabetics on high carbohydrate diet. So that was the diet to eat, was a high carbohydrate diet. So that's a whole other way we could take this, but that's, part of why I wrote the book was my journey to find the right way to eat for me, what to do. Am I crazy? Can I even try to dance? I had no idea. I mean, that in itself took me many, many, many years. And I would say, and then you can ask me some questions, but to feed into my struggle became, how to be the dancer that I could have been and wanted to be, and the life that I had just touched. I touched the greatness of Balanchine and the New York City Ballet, and my promise to be in it, my promise of being a leading dancer within that world, and then boom, it's gone. And my body's no longer what it was before. I'm now in a sick body. The diabetes hit me really hard. It affects the muscles, it affects the circulation, it affects the brain. Learning to eventually have to get on insulin and how to manage that alone with how to perform while you're on insulin, which is highly affected by exercise, up and down like a yo-yo. Everything has now changed. So how to stay in that life that, for me, there was no life without that anymore. How to become the healthiest I could be for that world, but also for myself and my future, and the struggles that I encountered in that. I think our struggles as dancers became completely magnified and heightened as far as the perfectionism and how to let go of not having a perfect performance when it wasn't perfect, and how to let go of, maybe you aren't ever going to be your potential, but is it worth still hanging in and staying here? And maybe sometimes it's not. Maybe it's not the right thing to do. And maybe I was crazy to hang in there. So I don't know if you want to ask a question on that note, and then I'll
I just wonder if you think it was because of the regime you were having that was so demanding that you actually got diabetes. So it was something that was, that you would have had anyway. What do you think?
Well, I think that I think it was a perfect storm. I think you have to have a genetic factor for sure to come down. It's autoimmune. So so I had to have had the genetic factor in there. But I think the lack of sleep and the stress, and possibly taking, I had a shot of antibiotics when I had those sores. Now, whether I was diabetic before and that's why I had the sores was because I was diabetic, or the shot of antibiotics set me over the top and my immune system reacted. I'll never know that. But what I do believe, because there's a lot, I always believed, and now there are studies that prove it, how important sleep is. I always believed that the lack of sleep is what set me up to.
Well, your nervous system becomes overwhelmed anyways.
My resistance was overwhelmed. And, but there weren't studies back in the 80s. I always felt like, I really know someday sleep is going to come out to be one of the most important things for our immune systems. And I believe for me, the breakdown of my immune system really started with the lack of sleep. And it didn't just happen from my performing career. I had a problem sleeping from when I can remember. I remember being 5 and 6 years old and having insomnia. I think that I was the kind of child that I picked up on a lot of tension around, anywhere. And we lived in Thailand, of all places, when I was 5 and 6. My father was serving, and he had to pick between Vietnam. This was during the Vietnam War, and Thailand. And he picked Thailand. Thank God. We lived on an army base, and I remember waking up, and I remember feeling something awful was happening, awful. And I was overwhelmed with it, and I felt dead spirits in my room that freaked me out. And I couldn't sleep. I mean, I just remember being like this really traumatized child, and I didn't know why, because of what was happening, and I wasn't watching news. I only found out years later that I was right in the heart of a lot of war and a lot of awful stuff happening. But I think as children, we're really sensitive. And
you build up your whole system until you're 7 years old. So
that's right. I was a very sensitive child, and I think that my sleep is what was affected. And then later on, I think when my parents got divorced, I was affected, and that affected my sleep. And then later on, when I was being physically abused by the new boyfriend, that affected my sleep. So it was not just, I don't blame ballet on and the schedule in the company on my lack of sleep. I blame well, there's no blame. It just happened. It happened. I was a sensitive child that never really had the tools to ground myself. I didn't have the ability to it's called self-soothing, because I do a lot of
emotionally be mature and stable to
that's right. And there's a lot of work in the somatics field now about, just how to try to soothe your body and your organs and nurture yourself. And a lot of that can be diet related, but a lot of it is energy and work that we can do on ourselves, that we can do with other people, that we need other people to help us with. I never really got the support I think that would have helped me. It just wasn't talked about. It wasn't something that, it was a generation that we just grew up in a certain way. So I do think that all contributed to the breakdown of my system. And then being in a very strenuous athletic profession that put a lot of stress on my body. And then emotionally, we had one of my great mentors, Joe Duell. He was a principal in the New York City Ballet, and he tragically committed suicide my second year. I mean, he saw my Sugar Plum. He actually was there for my Sugar Plum, and he was the one of those amazing dancers that used to correct me in company class. And he was very close with Lincoln Kirstein, and Joe really took it upon himself, and he used to always make an effort to work with me and correct me. And if he saw that I was struggling, he would take me to lunch and he would ask me what was going on. He was that person. He was a person. And I remember I was working with with rebirth, something called rebirthing. My aunt was a trainer for something called rebirthing. It was called the Loving Relationships Training, and it was a training that focused on the idea that our childhood influences us, and we have memories of what happened early in our life, and they go back to your birth, and that the experiences that you had at birth and early childhood is held within your subconscious. And they use this process of breath work to tap into the thoughts and decisions that are held in a very deep level in your body. And so I was working with somebody because I always knew that I had trauma in my body. And so I worked from a very young age with different therapists.
Everybody does.
Yes, exactly.
That should be
so I was with somebody at the time. So this is my second year in the company. I was working with a rebirther, and I remember telling her, I said, there's somebody in the company named Joseph Duell, who's been like a mentor to me, an amazing human being. And he stopped. All of a sudden he just stopped, and he's not saying hello to me in the hallways, and he's not coming and engaging with me, and he's not correcting me. And she said to me, did you ever think there might be something going on with Joe? And I said, because I said, I don't know what I've done. I don't know what I did wrong to make him not love me anymore. And she said, well, did you ever think maybe something's going on with Joe? And I looked at her, I said, oh gosh, I actually, no, I didn't. I mean, he's such a perfect person and mentor. And he's beautiful. He's like got everything in his life. He was engaged at the time to Maria Caligari, who is another principal in the company. And she said, and so she gave me an assignment. She said, your assignment this week is to take Joe to lunch and to ask him if he's okay. And so that was my assignment for the week from my therapist. And every day I'd go to try to find Joe, and I couldn't find him. And I remember once even being in the elevator with him once, going down to the stage level. And I was like, ask him. And he wouldn't look at me. And it got me so intimidated and nervous that he was mad at me, and then it was my problem, and I didn't ask him, and I was so upset that I didn't ask him, and then he killed himself, and it was so tragic, and I was so upset about it, and I was so depressed about it. And so what happened was Jerry Robbins had been calling me into a lot of his leading roles at that time. So this is directly after my Sugar Plum success. And Jerry Robbins saw the performance of Peter Boal and I, and started calling me to all of his leading roles. I did Gelsey Kirkland's part in the Goldberg Variations, and I was called to many of leading roles and dances at a gathering. And Jerry and Peter Martins and Lincoln Kirsten had a meeting, company meeting. It was the end of our winter season, and I think Petite Rien had just gone. And they told us that this had been just so tragic for all of us, and that we should all go away. There was a 3-week layoff, and we should all go away, and we should just not think about ballet. Just go be normal people, and go just forget about ballet, and we'll all start fresh when we come back. And so I went home. Actually, I think this was the year before Petite Rien. I think I'm wrong with the timing. I think this is the year of my Sugar Plum. So that was the year before the Petite Rien. And I went home, and my older sister, who had been a dancer, but she quit, and she was going to college, and she took me to a bunch of her fraternity parties, and we got drunk, and I was a normal person, and I had some crushes on some of the guys, and I just didn't think about ballet. I didn't think about ballet. So I went back to New York, and as I said, I am not the thoroughbred. I'm not the dancer who can take a couple weeks off. Mm-hmm. I think this might have been 2 weeks off. I'm not the dancer who can take 2 weeks off and be out of a point for 2 weeks and just come back and be all as if it was, just a day off. So I had taken off. And so I come back, and the first week back, Jerry Robbins calls me to learn the lead in his ballet Interplay. It's just one of his ballets, and I was learning the pas de deux in it. And it just so happened that he showed up to the rehearsals while the ballet mistress was teaching it, and he wanted to see it. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is like the worst. This is the worst disaster that could possibly be. I've taken 2 weeks off. I'm really I'm just finding my toes again. I'm like a beginner. I mean, I'm not ready at all. And I'm looking at the clock, and I'm thinking, please tick, please go fast. And it just as fate would have it, there was 10 minutes left. And he said, I want to see Zippora and Peter Boal. And he made us do the pas de deux. And I actually thought it was not as bad as I feared it would be, but it was bad enough for Jerry. That was it. Jerry Robbins was like, you're in one moment, you're out the next. And that was it. Boom, I was out. He never called me back ever again to anything, ever. Wow. And he lived for years later. And I even became a soloist, and that was it. He never called me back to anything. And it was tragic for me because, Jerry had, Balanchine was gone, and Jerry was it. Jerry was our genius. He was who you thought would nurture you, your talent, and who would give you your life and your career. And he had started to do that with me. And then boom, in one moment it was gone. And I took that really hard. I remember taking it really, really, really personally. And that on top of Joe's death,
So you had two big traumas just
I
before.
had two big traumas at the same time. And then, so I'm going backwards now. So when I said I got injured, that's when I got injured. I was in class and I remember coming down from a jump and I twisted my foot. And I just remember thinking, you know, I wasn't fully present. I wasn't present in my body. I was in my trauma and just trying to do the motions and trying to hold on. And I got injured. I went home. When I came back from that was when I was called to Le Petit Rien. So that's when Le Petit Rien was being choreographed and being done. And then that's when I got the symptoms. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to know when the diabetes actually started, because the symptoms started, I got those sores under my arms that turned into big boils, ugly boils. And
but
then
it didn't happen overnight, and it's a build up, you know.
It built up. I got a big shot of antibiotics from I went to an urgent care before I went to the dermatologist, and I have to wonder if that's what sent me over the top, because my immune system it was on overload. So then I was diagnosed. So then I spent the next 6 years of my life trying to catch it back, trying to become what I was, not to have it be happening. Mm-hmm. I was trying to save my life, but then I had to, at the same time, you know, redefine what my new life was.
And that's interesting what you're saying, because, you know, you really said it. It's like you were defined by, you know, the others looking at you, choosing you, and this is kind of a drama for most dancers, right? Because we depend on that, and then we lose ourselves through this. Yeah. And I wonder, I mean, I don't know even if it's possible, you know, to actually learn that sooner, so you can be more of a person, yeah, rather than, you know, being jolted right, left, and center, and really being completely disconnected with your own body and with your own self, because this is what happens, right?
Well, yes. Well, what I like to look at, what I do look at is that, you know, the reality is that the classroom is a perfect model for a family unit. You have your parent. Your parent is your director, your ballet mistress. Whatever issue you might have had in your early life is going to be projected onto your director and your teachers. It just is. It's just how,
and vice versa. That's the problem.
And vice versa. And the other dancers are going to be your siblings or your friends, or whatever issues you might have had are going to come up. So whatever issues you can't run away from yourself. You know, if you've had issues within your family, I think the sooner we can start looking at ourselves and see how that gets projected onto our circumstances. It's not just the ballet world, it's whatever dynamic you're in your life. It's the body inherently wants to heal. The soul inherently wants to find homeostasis and peace. Mm-hmm. So we seek out relationships and dynamics in order to show ourselves what is being held inside of us. So, you know, for me, you know, it was whatever I had that was unresolved. They actually say whichever parent you had the most difficulty with is going to be the one that you're going to most project onto. I always had this thing of that whatever I did, I couldn't really get the love I wanted, no matter how good my performance
was. Is self-love, huh?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. So I always felt like even if the show went well, tomorrow's another day. And this is the reality of our profession. You're as good as your last performance. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it really does hinge a lot on the tastes and the desires and the wants of the people we're trying to impress. So the audience could go crazy about you, but if your director said it was bad, well, that's who's casting you in something else. That's who we are dependent upon. So I feel for myself, it was very important that I be looking at what I had unresolved with my father, with the person who was abusive to me. For me, I think my inability to voice myself and speak up was directly related to the physical abuse that I that I had with my mother's boyfriend. The positive part of it was he didn't come into my life until later. So I was a very outspoken child. I always voiced myself. I was very vocal. I always told people when I saw injustice and when what they were doing was wrong. The good part is that my early childhood did not shut me down in that way. So I didn't have a problem until my mother's boyfriend moved in with us when I was about 12. And I was physically hurt when I would say things like, you can't tell me what to do, you're not my father. Mm-hmm. Or I would speak up when I saw something wrong that he was doing. I would speak up and say, you cannot do that. He was like, oh yes, I can. So his ability to overpower me, I mean, I would go crazy. I was screaming. I was pissed. I was mad at this person, but he had the ability to shut me up. So by the time I went to New York, I feel that my voice, I swallowed my voice. Mm-hmm. And I was afraid to speak up. But because I had been hit for speaking up, but also because I didn't want to be seen as the bad kid anymore. Like in my family, I was like, oh geez, we wish you would just shut up. You know, I was known as the problem maker because I was always telling people. My siblings used to call me mom because I was always telling them what to clean up, and I was always directing them. You know, maybe that's why I like to direct, and I'm a good teacher. It's always saying, you have to do this and you have to do that. They're like, yes, mom, yes, boss. I mean, I was that sibling, right? So I always had this feeling of like, they don't really like me. I'm kind of like the bad one. So when I moved to New York, I didn't want to be that. I wanted to be good. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to fit in. And
that's
so
the ballet syndrome as well, huh?
Yeah, I think so. And I remember reading articles about people saying, oh, all the ballerinas are bitches. And I'm like, I'm not going to be a bitch. I'm not going to do that. You know, I was just determined to not be that way. And I think that I purposely silenced my voice. And then when I developed the diabetes, I didn't want to be known as the sick girl. I didn't want to ask for it, and I didn't want to be given a specialty case. I thought, if I can't live up to what is expected of me as just like everybody else in the New York City Ballet, then get out. If you can't hang with it, you get out. It's my responsibility to show that I deserve to be here, and I only want to be treated that way. So I put myself, I never went to the director. I never wanted to have anybody look at me differently. And I also knew full well that if I told them what I was dealing with and what I was going through, there is no way he was going to
you didn't tell them anything?
Well, they knew I'd been diagnosed. I had to tell them because I had to miss some performances to go home and deal with it. And I told the ballet mistress I'd been diagnosed. And of course she was like, who's going to do your part tonight? You know, it was all about the part, you know, who's filling in. I was like, oh my God, I have to get out of here. Like, I can't worry about who's replacing me because I'll just go crazy. So when I came back from being home, I took extra time at home. I had to learn how to, do a bunch of stuff. And that's all in my book. I actually went to live with my grandmother who was.
You wrote a book called, you have to tell us.
My book is called The Sugarless Plum. And because I always call myself the Sugarless Plum. It was like, ha, 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 I can't eat sugar. But I actually went to live with my grandmother, who was the dancer in vaudeville, who happened to also be a health nut. You know, before that was a term. She was very into health. So I went and lived with her, and she helped me get back on track. And we figured out the best ways to eat and how to take care of myself. And so when I went back to New York, what happened was my first company class, Peter Martins came up to me. I was doing tendus, and he took me by the hand and he said, are you all better now? And I looked at him and I said, and then I turned. You know, I was new it was my third year in the New York City Ballet. You know, mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, I'm all better now, and that was it. You know, that was it. That was our diabetes discussion. Good, it's gone. Nobody has to talk about it, you know, and I have to take responsibility for it. First of all, people don't really know what goes into diabetes, and that it's
no, absolutely not.
You didn't just catch a cold; it's not going away. but I have to take responsibility that I'm the one who said, yes, it's all better now. You know, I played into that out of my fear that if he didn't think that it was all better now, he was never going to cast me in anything again. And, you know, I couldn't accept that. So I played into it as well. And then it played into my anxiety that I always had to show everybody that I was okay. And I had to prove that I could do what I did before. And I compared myself to the level I was at before. And that's just a tremendous amount of pressure for anybody to hang at, especially somebody now with a disease. So my next years in the company, that was my third year in the company. I didn't get promoted till 6 years later. So my next 6 years in the company, I'd say were very up and down, and were very challenging. And I definitely threw myself into, I like to say, you know, I was always a seeker before I became a dancer. My life was about healing from a young age. I recognized that I had some abuse in my life, but I had healers in my family. I said my aunt, you know, she was a rebirther. My mother, my father, they were all very spiritually oriented people. Maybe they became more and did better later on, not as much when we were younger, but I was inclined towards that mentality. And because of that, that directly influenced how I regarded my diagnosis. And I recognized I was in denial. I recognized that this was not healthy. I made a choice. I made daily choices to stay in the world of ballet, knowing that the choices I was making might not be the healthiest for me. I had everybody else saying, don't you think you should quit? But that only push.
Not necessarily quit, but maybe make some adjustments, you know, and give yourself some slack.
People were worried about me, and they didn't quite understand, and your viewers will understand. I think unless you know what it feels like to fall in love with dance and to be touched by something in your life that is so core to why you are on this earth, that you feel you found your reason for existing, your expression, what you're meant to do on this planet, and that there's no life without that, you know, I wasn't willing to let it go. I just wasn't willing to let it go. And so every day I was faced with, I'm crazy for doing this, and yet I have to do it, and I have to hang in here. You know, it was a daily thing, and I was very alone in it, because there was nobody I could talk to that could relate to it. So the people that I confided in were all outside of the ballet world. So I found a community of people. I always had somebody that I could talk to, whether it be a therapist or somebody on a health and a consciousness and a spiritual type of path that was kind of helping to guide me, that was gonna care about me whether I danced or not, but kind of got that this was my challenge, this was my obstacle, this was my thing. If that makes sense.
So how did you make the decision to actually stop it?
Well, okay. So, first what happened was, I really almost quit. I almost quit. And every day I said to myself, this is it. This is the day. And every day that my feet were walking towards Peter Martin's office to tell him I have to quit, they would just happen to go like that. And I'd end up in company class. And I was just like, I just need one more performance. Just let me do this one more ballet. Just let me experience this one more ballet. And I just was so upset about it, because I thought, you know, I was in denial about the diabetes, and it was really hard for me to accept it. And there were plenty of performances that I almost passed out during, and playing around with insulin was very dangerous for me. And again, it's all in the book, but I didn't like the fact that I couldn't give it up. I felt like, okay, this is just harder than accepting diabetes. Having to let go of dance is going to be the hardest thing, because I love it so much, but I was bothered by the fact that I couldn't let it go. So I was doing a lot of journaling at the time because I was trying to really find out, was this just another level of denial that I just had to, put my nose in the dog shit, I just had to accept it. And I couldn't do it. What was wrong with me? There's plenty of people that had to quit. Some people had injuries, some people had, weight issues, some people, like, we all have to come to terms with it at some point. It's a young profession, you have to come to terms. And I didn't like that I couldn't let it go. So I did a lot of journaling. And what I found in the journaling, what came up was that I started to write things just like, it's going to be such a relief when I finally quit. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, something's happening here. I'm pressuring myself to quit, and I'm acting like I'm playing the violins, like, oh, I had to quit because poor me, I've got diabetes, and poor me, poor me. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute here. I'm going to go out and quit, and the rest of my life, I'm going to have this poor me. I had to quit because of my diabetes story. I was like, that's not right. I was like, that's not right. I'm actually going to use it as an excuse, because actually the truth is quitting would have been easier. Mm-hmm. Quitting would have been easier than hanging in there and having to see, like, at that point, I wasn't getting any leading roles anymore. And I was just in the same old roles. Of course, they're Balanchine ballets, so they're great, but I wasn't being nurtured. People would come from the outside and see me and want to do ballets on me. And the director would say, no, don't use her. Like, they would actually tell people not to use me. And it was a very painful place to be for me, because I was like, well, let's just go to another company, a smaller company. And I was like, but I didn't want to start over. And I just felt like, how do I explain my health? And at least in New York City Ballet, they knew me. And Peter always let me do Sugar Plum. He let me do Apollo. There were certain roles he always let me do, even though he wasn't giving me new roles. I said, just stay with where you are. And when I realized that I was going to quit, because it would have been easier to quit and then for the rest of my life just say the diabetes made me quit, I thought, it's just not true. It's just not true, because I hadn't done everything yet. I said, there's so much I haven't done yet. I still hadn't found the right way to eat. I still was dealing with my perfectionism. I'm still hard on myself, where if I came off stage and I felt I hadn't done my best, I was still really mad and like blaming myself and my diet. Like, I was like, what would happen if you stayed and actually, like, just dealt with the fact that it wasn't great. And that's just okay. Sometimes you did your best. Mm-hmm. Maybe your best is, maybe your new potential is going to have to be what was your best now instead of what was your potential. I said, why don't you do this? And I made a pact with myself. I said, you stay and you give it a little bit more time with this new mentality. You work on your mental health and the way you're perceiving your situation, because you'll never know what could have been if you don't try. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, I'm going to stay and I'm going to try. So I stayed and I worked with my perfectionism, and I learned to deal with, you know what, it wasn't your best and you aren't going to be what you thought you were going to be. And that's just okay. You still got to have that experience of this moment.
That's really beautiful to hear, I think very few dancers get to that stage before they stop dancing.
That's right. And then what happened was I got promoted to soloist. I was promoted. And so then everything changed, because then I started to get time off to, I wasn't in every show, and I didn't have 3 ballets a night. And it's it's hard on a certain level, because it's only when you're on all the time that you've become so comfortable on stage that as Ilya Horvath from Gyrotonics used to say to us, you want to play on stage. You only get that play when you're so comfortable on stage. So I wasn't performing as much anymore, so I didn't get that play. But with my new mental health mentality, this was what was right for my body. I get to have nights off. I got to have time now. I got to have more rest. I didn't have to be there 12 hours a day. And so I ended up, I did stay 6 years, 6 more years as a soloist. And then And then I said, okay, guess what, Zippora? You did it. You did it. You know, maybe you never reached your potential. You didn't become a huge principal dancer star. There were ballets, you know, I was never going to do. I was like, but you were a soloist with the New York City Ballet. You got to experience things that, you know.
No, and
So,
you had
so
the
good.
guts and the courage to change your mindset so that your whole life could shift in the end. This is what you're proving with your
That's right.
story, which is very beautiful.
That's right. And then my teacher, who was the ballet mistress and a dear friend, Susie Hendel, who passed away a couple years ago, um, she came to me and she said, you know, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. I just want to get completely away from ballet. I don't know yet. I just need some time not thinking about ballet. And she said, you know, Zippy, I think you'd be really good at staging the ballets. I was like, no. I was like, no, Susie, I have to get away from the ballets. I just don't want to be part of the perfectionism anymore. And she said, you know, Zippy, just, she's like, I think you should just try it. So she scheduled a meeting with me and Barbara Horgan, who was Balanchine's secretary, and they gave me my first job. And my first ballet that I set was Serenade and Concerto Barocco. And I remember it was for Goucher College, and I remember teaching the ballets, and it happened. It was like I was back at Sheila's studio where the music was just, I had that moment where something bigger and greater was happening, and it was me sharing it with the other dancers, and I saw it happening in them, and I felt the privilege of giving them what I felt, you know, long before my struggle ever hit. I was back before my struggle. I was back, you know, in those magical times, and I just thought, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, and it just, you know, it just happened to me. It happened to me that I thought, you know, I don't have to teach the things that I struggled with. I can actually teach the things that I tried to find a way through, and how I learned how to go through it. Like that, I can be different. I can teach it different. Mm-hmm. And so that's basically what I've been doing for the past. I retired in 1999. So it's been 23 years now that I've been teaching and staging ballets, which I never ever thought that I'd stay within the ballet, you know, the dance profession. But you know, it's been an honor. It's been an incredible honor. So
wow, that's fun to hear, because I mean I really love your story and how it unfolded. It's really it's very beautiful. So could you tell us, I mean, you know, I had many questions, but you kind of touched them all at the same time. I mean, with what you were saying. So could you just let us know what the last 2 years, the COVID years, were for you, you know, mentally, emotionally, and
well, I think for me, it's going to be definitely different than a lot of, you know, my students, because, you know, I already did it. You know, I'm a freelance teacher and artist, so mm-hmm. I don't say no to many jobs, because as a freelance person, you just never know when your next job is. So I say yes, and I take on too much, and I end up traveling more than I want to. I always love the moments of being in the studio and sharing and meeting the dancers and bringing Balanchine to their lives. But for me personally, I'm a smell the roses person. I just want to be, I'm a homebody. I just want to be at home, mm-hmm. and not be out there so much. And so for me, the pandemic was basically saying,
holiday.
You're grounded, and you have permission to be grounded. Mm-hmm. You know, it was a moment that I needed the rest. I needed not to be on an airplane. I needed not to be driving the traffic in Los Angeles. So it really gave me a pause. Mm-hmm. With that said, I was just as busy on Zoom teaching, and I found myself really being there for a lot of my students who really struggled, and a lot of people in my life who were very isolated, who it was really challenging for them not to have contact. My sister lives around the corner from me, so I never stopped seeing her and going for walks. And I have some studios that are very close by that I had some students I never stopped being in the studio with masks on, doing private lessons with people that I knew were being very careful with their health, and we were testing all the time. So I never stopped having physical contact with people. So for me personally, it was a necessary time for me to take a pause and take some rest. And my sister and I started doing these little, we called it turn out, tune in, little interviews with people on Zoom to just talk about some things and some issues that people have had, and really start to look at, we're both really passionate about health and healing, and the mental toll, the emotional toll that dancers go through. So we use that as an opportunity to have some conversations.
I invite people to go and watch them, actually, because I watched a few of them and they were really fun. So what is it? What is your channel?
It's called Turn Out, Tune In. It's on my website, ZippораKarz.com.
Okay, I will put it anyway in the description.
Click on that, and then all the episodes, you can see them. So I had a lot of students that we had some conversations with, the diversity issue that was going on, and had some conversations about that. One of my diabetic dancer students dealt with some bulimia, and we talked about, some of the eating stuff that she was dealing with. So some really honest conversations with some people that are very, very dear to me. And I felt very passionate about that, as my sister Romy does, that, I always feel like what we do is so spiritual in certain ways, and then the toll it takes on our bodies, and the perfectionism I talk, the way we treat ourselves is so not, and the dynamics that we end up in is so brutal to ourselves, that I just feel like these conversations are so important. I know you and I started to touch on. I don't want to say to fully let go of some of these dynamics, because I say to my students, you really need a little bit of perfectionism to be in this profession, because if you didn't have it, we just work so hard. You have to have a critical eye. And I know even looking at yourself, videotaping yourself is such a helpful tool. It's very hard not to be self-critical when you have to look at yourself and see yourself. I mean, I used to just cringe when I would see myself, but it can be a useful tool if you learn how to use it in a way that we're trying to help you, we're trying to support you. I think the more we can be a team with our bodies. I mean, I feel that way with my diabetes. I feel like I had to learn how to, like hold myself like a child. Like if a child's crying, you don't scream at it.
It's also really building up a relationship with your body, with your mental body, with your emotional body. I mean, it's really taking everything into account instead of, concentrating on that physicality only. I mean, there's no way around. Dancing is hard. It's very demanding, but it's how you choose to interact with yourself that will make a huge difference.
That's right. That's right. And really using your voice as well. One of the things that I wish I had been able to do. I know my situation was so different because it was an actual disease, and I didn't want to be seen as somebody with a disease. But let's say I didn't have the disease, and my feet were hurting, and I had to do a role, and I needed to help myself. I wish I had the courage to say to people, listen, I need some time. I'm struggling a little bit with this. I'll be much better if I have some time for myself. Yeah. I promise. I will show you. I will do the work. I'm not asking for I'm not trying to be lazy. I'm not trying to be a specialty case, but I wish within the dance profession we had more support for our physical bodies and the toll that is put on them. And then health wise, I wish that I know nowadays there is more PT is more accepted than it was. I think nutrition is much more accepted.
Yeah, but I think it needs to be really inserted into how you teach, because that's the problem. So they learn about diet there, I mean, nutrition there, and then about mental health and about everything. But if you arrive in the studio and the person in front of you is just as rigid as a stick, well,
That's right.
they cannot they cannot interact with this, you know. And I think that's the biggest problem, really, still.
I think so. You know, I was having a conversation. A friend of mine just became a new director, and she was saying, you know, she'd like to also. We need to reevaluate bodies. You know, what is an acceptable body? I'm not talking about not having muscle tone, but you know, Balanchine really, he had all shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
Everybody didn't have to be this stick figure.
Vaganova too. She was teaching, you know, different body. I mean, you had the long one, you had the short one that could turn, you had the one that could jump. You know, it was all about, you know, every individual was very specific and had their own, you know, talent.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. So I would love to see. I feel like, you know, since Balanchine's passing, what I watched is I watched her profession become more and more athletic, and that's just that happens. You see it in gymnastics, you see it in figure skating. You know, you see it in everywhere. I mean, what they're doing is crazy. It's amazing. The technical feats are amazing, but it just, if I was young and dancing, I don't think I'd go for this career, because I even look at the choreography now and I think, you know, some of the new choreography that comes out, I think, oh, I would never be able to do that stuff. So my hope is that, you know, there are going to be more and more directors that have the courage to be open to what we're saying, not disproportionate bodies. I know we're in a visual field. It has to be visually, aesthetically pleasing to our eye, so the music can express through you. That's why we train our bodies. But it doesn't have to be so overly, you know, thin that it's unhealthy. You know, that each body can find the most beautiful way that it can be and thrive in this athletic profession. And so that's physically and emotionally also, you know, to be able to, and mentally accept that, you know, as artists, you know, the artists always were those in society that are expressing what needs to be expressed in those times. And oftentimes they're not the most stable. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm saying it's a superpower. There's something beautiful about, you know, even how I was as a kid, you know, being sensitive to your environment and being emotional about it is a beautiful thing, to be able to express that. So I would love to be able to continue to see that the artist's role in society and in dance is not just as an athlete, but as an artist, that's expressing why we live, the times we live, you know, what our hearts need to express. You know, that's why I was drawn. You know, I always feel like, you know, we're drawn to this art form for a reason. That's why I was drawn to it. Yeah, I mean, I felt that it was the perfect way for me to get to express what was the deepest part of me. And the ballets that I got to dance were so musically inclined to allow that expression to come out. So I'm grateful for that. But what about all those people that just don't feel that they're fitting into the way that the world has changed and the way that it's looking? And I know that, you know, it's finances for, you know, to support these companies and the arts and all.
I think it's a total different conversation in the end, because it's true, we're getting into a different era, and I think what I would like to say to the, you know, young dancers who are watching, it's like, you're gonna have to create a new world, you know, which is both scary and exciting. So, you know, the more they're gonna grow, the more they can learn about themselves, the more beautiful this world will be.
And what you said, I think, is so important, in that what I see with this generation is that it's going to come from them. You know, they don't have the big, you know, Balanchines. I mean, there are some really amazing choreographers and directors out there for sure, but I think as a generality, you see the dancers themselves becoming mini entrepreneurs, and they have followings. They have followings on social media. The kids are following them. I think it's going to be them that changes the narrative, and there's so much conversation about mental health happening, and body size. I see it happening, but I think what we're talking about is there's still a structure that's really still in place, that they're learning how to navigate themselves, but we'll see where they take it when those dancers today become the directors.
And that's my hope. It's like, I always thought when I started this journey, I thought, oh, it has to change from the bottom to the top. And then I realized I was like hitting brick walls anyway. And I was like, no, this is not going to happen. And I really believe that it's about teaching something else to the kids that are now, you know, learning to be dancers. So when they get into their position, they can bring something else, you know.
So I think that's what's going to happen. I think that's what's going to happen. What needs to happen. I don't think it's going to be easy. I mean, I think that there's so much plus and minus with the whole social media, with the whole. I find it all difficult. You know, I find myself having to step away.
It's very superficial, you know.
It's very superficial, and you think you're connected, and you're not as connected when you're really connecting with people. Yeah. So it's we're living in very strange times.
Yeah, but it's really exciting too, because, you know, I feel that there's so much possibilities, you know, even though, as you say, it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it.
I think
sorry, Zippora, we're going to wrap it up because I don't want to take your whole day. This has been such an exciting conversation. Thank you so much. I just would like you to, you know, leave us with a little advice for, you know, young dancers. If you had one advice to give, what would that be?
You know, if I had one advice to give, I think it would just be, you know, really tune into your hearts, and nurture yourself in ways that you feel you'd like others to give you. I think that in the end, we all find that that's what we had to do. Yeah. And I think that the sooner you can do that, the better. The sooner you can understand that it's really the relationship with ourselves. And
it's a journey, you know, it's not something you go like this and it's done.
It's a journey. And, you know, I remember, and I'll just say this to your, I remember I was having a therapy session or something. And the person said to me, you know, you're going to be a really good teacher someday. And I took that to mean I'm not a good dancer. And I took it as this is awful. This is awful. Like, my dream is to be a great dancer. And how dare, like, this is terrible. I don't want to be a good teacher. That's terrible. And so now that I'm a teacher and I look back, of course I see what she meant. She didn't mean I'm not going to be a good dancer, but she just meant that, you know, there are qualities that we can only see as our life unfolds. You know, I don't like to just be Pollyanna and say, oh, everything's meant to be. I don't see it like that, because life is hard and life is messy and obstacles are not easy to get through. But there is a value. There is a value to working through and working through it with yourself and knowing that you got through something. And when you look back and you see how it created who you are and how you think the way that you do, you have a better sense of why things happened the way that they did. Mm-hmm. And then we take that with us, whatever we do. And I really think that that's one of the most important things in life, no matter what we end up doing, it's really the relationship with ourselves. Because look, we all know people can have tons of money and huge yachts and tons of success and be miserable.
Yeah.
You know, they can be miserable. You know, the princess in the castle can be really miserable. So I think where you are now is as important as, you know, where you think you want to be. You know, be in the now.
And enjoy the journey, right? I mean, because
And
that's what it is.
that's right. That's right. The journey, it actually never stops. That you there's no there.
No.
You never make it there. You know, we're always trying to grow. We're always trying to improve. And the sooner we can find some self-acceptance, that just know that you are uniquely you, and you are uniquely you for a reason. You know, there's something inherently beautiful in every human being, and there's nobody quite like you. And so I'd say just find the you in you, and nurture that,
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Zippora, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sabine. Thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
I really appreciated that
Thank
conversation.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.